My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 34 years old. I need you to hear this, because if you've ever trusted your family blindly, if you've ever believed that blood means loyalty, then what happened to me will shake you to your core. But before I tell you everything, let me ask you something. What would you do if you inherited a fortune, only to discover the people you loved most saw you as nothing more than a paycheck? That's exactly what happened to me. And the way it ended? Well, let's just say no one in my family will ever forget it. High voltage. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me, would you forgive your family for betraying you, or would you make them pay? All right, let's begin. It started with a phone call I never expected. Evelyn Carter? The lawyer's voice was clipped, professional. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late uncle, Henry Davenport. I froze. Uncle Henry, the eccentric, distant relative I barely knew, who had spent most of his life in solitude. Yes, I said slowly. I'm pleased to inform you that you've been named his primary heir. Effective immediately, you've inherited $11 million. The words crashed over me like a tidal wave. $11 million. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then a wild laugh escaped my lips. My life had been paycheck to paycheck, filled with constant worry about bills, about rent, about survival. And now, overnight, everything had changed. My first instinct? To share the news. With my family. Because surely they'd be happy for me. Surely they'd celebrate my good fortune. Surely they'd be proud. Oh, how wrong I was. I never made it home that night. The accident happened fast. 1 minute, I was driving down Maple Avenue, rehearsing the words in my head. Mom, Dad, you won't believe this. Emily, I finally caught a break. And the next, headlights blinded me. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. Then darkness swallowed everything whole. When I woke, the hospital room was cold. White walls, machines beeping, the faint smell of antiseptic. My body ached, every bone screaming in protest. But worse than the pain was the emptiness. No flowers. No cards. No familiar faces at my bedside. Days passed. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked my vitals. But my family? Nowhere. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for the phone with trembling hands and dialed my sister Emily. She answered on the third ring. Emily? I croaked, my voice raw. It's me. I've been in an accident. I'm in the hospital. Why haven't you? Her sigh cut me off. Cold. Dismissive. Evelyn, I don't have time for this. And honestly, I don't have the money to babysit a loser who can't take care of herself. The words sliced through me sharper than any broken glass. A loser. I whispered. That's what you are, she said flatly. You've always been the family burden. Don't call me again. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief, my chest tight, my throat burning with unshed tears. But maybe Emily was just having a bad day. Maybe Mom and Dad would care. Maybe someone would care. So I called them. One by one. Each answer was the same. Cold. Detached. Excuse after excuse. We don't have time for this, Evelyn. You're always in some kind of trouble. Why can't you ever handle things on your own? By the end, I wasn't crying anymore. I was numb. My family had abandoned me. Or maybe they had been waiting for this moment all along. 5 days later, they finally appeared. Not to check on me. Not to comfort me. They walked into my hospital room with smug smiles and a stranger at their side, a woman I didn't recognize. Emily crossed her arms. We just came to say goodbye, Evelyn. You've dragged us down long enough. The stranger laughed softly. She doesn't look like much, does she? But then her eyes landed on me. And suddenly, her smirk vanished. Her face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she gasped. She's the heir. The room went dead silent. Emily's face darkened, and my mother shifted uncomfortably, but it was too late. The stranger's words hung in the air like smoke no one could clear. She's the heir? My father repeated slowly, turning a sharp gaze on me. I tried to push myself up in bed, my chest tightening. What do you mean by that? I asked the woman. Her lips trembled. She glanced at my family, then back at me, as if realizing she had said too much. Emily stepped forward quickly. Ignore her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But I saw it in her eyes. In all their eyes. That flicker of panic. That desperate attempt to stuff the truth back into the shadows. And in that moment I knew. They hadn't ignored me because they were busy. They hadn't abandoned me because they were tired. They had abandoned me because they already knew. They knew about the inheritance. And they thought I wouldn't live to claim it. The realization hit me like a second accident. All those cold phone calls. The dismissive words. The silence. It wasn't indifference. It was calculation. They had written me off. Because in their minds, Evelyn Carter, the family burden, was finally out of the way. I stared at Emily, my blood running cold. You knew. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had no comeback. My father cleared his throat. Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. You're confused. You've been through trauma. But his voice cracked just slightly. And that was all the confirmation I needed. The stranger, still pale, turned to Emily. You didn't tell me she was alive. You didn't tell me she... Shut up. Emily snapped. But it was too late. The cracks in their carefully constructed mask were showing. And I, Evelyn Carter, the one they had always dismissed as weak, as useless as nothing, had just seen the truth. They didn't just resent me. They had planned to erase me. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The Evelyn they knew, the one who sought their approval, who craved their affection, she died in that accident. The Evelyn who woke up? She was different. Colder. Sharper. Stronger. And if my family thought they could steal my inheritance, my future, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next morning, Emily returned alone. Her heels clicked against the tile floor, her perfume filling the sterile air. She looked down at me with a smile that was all teeth. So, she said casually, you must be feeling overwhelmed with all this money business. Uncle Henry was eccentric. I don't think he meant to put this kind of responsibility on you. I raised an eyebrow. Responsibility? Yes, she said smoothly. $11 million is a lot to handle. Too much for someone like you. But don't worry. We're family. We can manage it for you. Safely. I almost laughed. Almost. Manage it, I repeated. She nodded. Of course. Sign a few papers, and it'll all be taken care of. You won't have to worry about anything. I studied her carefully, memorizing the way her eyes glittered with greed, the way her lips curled in anticipation. For years, Emily had thought of me as weak, stupid, gullible. She had no idea who she was dealing with now. I leaned forward, my voice low. Get out. Her smile faltered. What? Get out. I repeated, my tone sharper. She stared at me as if I'd slapped her. Evelyn, I'm offering to help. I don't need your help. I cut in coldly. Not now. Not ever. Leave. For a moment, rage flashed in her eyes. But she swallowed it down, plastered on a brittle smile, and turned to go. Fine, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But don't come crying to me when you realize you're in over your head. Her heels clicked away. The door slammed shut. And I smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of Emily. I was ready for her. Later that night, I received a call from the lawyer again. Miss Carter, he said, I need to warn you. Your family has contacted my office. They've been inquiring about contesting the will. My grip tightened on the phone. On what grounds? They claim you're unfit to manage such a large inheritance due to your history. I froze. What history? The lawyer hesitated. They've presented documents suggesting you've been unstable, financially reckless, mentally fragile. My chest burned with rage. They were rewriting my life, twisting every mistake, every flaw, into a weapon. They're trying to paint me as incompetent, I said flatly. Yes, the lawyer confirmed. But don't worry. The evidence you inherited is ironclad. They can't win. Still, you should be prepared. They won't stop here. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Prepared? Oh, I was more than prepared. I was ready to fight fire with fire. And my family was about to learn that the loser they dismissed was the last person they should have underestimated. When I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't go home. Not to the house that still smelled faintly of my mother's perfume. Not to the familiar walls that had witnessed years of silence, tension, and cruelty. Instead, I checked into a small apartment downtown. Sparse. Quiet. Anonymous. It was the first time in my 34 years that I had a space truly my own. No family photos watching from the walls. No footsteps echoing down the hall like threats. Just me and the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. And it felt liberating. The first night, I sat cross-legged on the floor with the documents from my lawyer spread out around me. The inheritance was real. Secure. Untouchable as long as I didn't make a single mistake. I could almost hear Emily's voice in my head sneering. You'll mess it up, Evelyn. You always do. Not this time. This time, I wasn't going to crumble under pressure. This time, I was going to win. My lawyer had warned me that my family's campaign was escalating. They've already submitted affidavits, he said. Your father and sister are testifying that you've been emotionally unstable for years. They even claim you once threatened to harm yourself. I clenched my fists. That was a lie, but a clever one. The kind of lie that would stick if repeated enough. They're building a case to make you seem unfit, the lawyer added. It won't hold in court, but in the public eye it could. Public eye. The word stuck with me. My family wasn't just after the money. They were after my dignity, my reputation. They wanted to erase me, even if they couldn't legally take what was mine. And that was when I realized they weren't just greedy. They were dangerous. The next week, I kept a low profile. I didn't answer their calls, didn't respond to their letters. I let them stew in silence. But I listened. I watched. Emily had always been reckless when she thought she was in control. And sure enough, it didn't take long before she slipped. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I saw it. A photo of Emily at a high-end restaurant, holding a glass of champagne, tagged with her new circle of wealthy friends. The caption read, "To new beginnings, gemstone sparkles, can't wait for what's coming next." And there it was, proof she was already spending money she didn't have. Money she expected to steal from me. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time in days. Emily had just given me the leverage I needed. The next morning, I met with a private investigator. His name was Marcus. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with a quiet efficiency that made me trust him instantly. "You want me to dig into your family," he said, jotting notes on a pad. "Yes," I replied. "Every debt, every secret, every crack in their armor. I don't care how small. If it can be used against them, I want to know." He nodded slowly. "That's not the usual request. Most people hire me to protect them from family, not to go on the offensive." I held his gaze. Most people haven't been betrayed the way I have. Something in my tone must have convinced him, because he slid the pad back into his folder and extended his hand. "All right, Miss Carter," he said. "I'll get you what you need." Days turned into weeks. I healed. Slowly, painfully, but with a determination that fueled me more than any painkiller could. And then Marcus returned. "You were right," he said, dropping a thick file onto my table. "Your family is rotten to the core." I opened the file and scanned the contents. My father, it turned out, was drowning in debt. His business ventures had collapsed, but he kept up appearances by borrowing against everything he owned. If the truth came out, his reputation would be destroyed. Emily was worse. Gambling. Fraud. A string of affairs. She had cultivated an image of success, but it was nothing more than a house of cards. And my mother, the one who had always stood silently by while they tore me down, had been funneling money to cover Emily's debts for years. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of proof. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, staring out at the city lights, my mind spinning with possibility. I could go public. Leak everything. Destroy them with one stroke.
But no.
That would be too easy. Too merciful. They had abandoned me in a hospital bed. Left me to die. They deserved worse. They deserved to watch their lives unravel, piece by piece, the same way they had tried to unravel mine. The next morning, I called Marcus. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "What's that?" "Plant seeds," I replied. "Rumors. Whispers. Make sure the right people start asking the wrong questions. But don't trace it back to me. Not yet." Marcus chuckled softly. Subtle. I like it. Within days, it began. A business partner quietly backed out of a deal with my father. A wealthy friend stopped returning Emily's calls. Invitations to events that had once arrived like clockwork suddenly dried up. It was slow, almost invisible, but I saw it. I saw the cracks spreading, and I savored every second of it. One evening, as I returned to my apartment, I found a letter slipped under my door. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper. I opened it carefully. "We know what you're doing. Stop now, or you'll regret it." No signature, no return address. But I knew. They were starting to feel it, and they were scared. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the hunted. I was the hunter. And my family? They were my prey. The warning note didn't scare me. It thrilled me, because it meant my family was finally starting to feel the pressure. And I hadn't even really started yet. The first trap was simple, elegant. Emily's gambling habit was a ticking time bomb, and all it needed was a little push. Through Marcus, I arranged for her to receive a tip from a supposed insider. A high-stakes card game, invitation only, with promises of unbeatable odds. The kind of bait Emily couldn't resist. Of course, the insider was one of Marcus's contacts. The game was rigged from the start. Within hours, Emily was out 20 grand. Money she didn't have. Money she had already borrowed. Marcus kept me updated with quiet efficiency, his voice calm even as he described Emily's meltdown. "She tried to bluff her way out," he said. "Didn't work. They're demanding payment." I leaned back in my chair, a smile tugging at my lips. Good. The second trap was more delicate. My father's business had been barely holding on, propped up by reputation alone. His partners believed he was solvent because he always paid on time. What they didn't know was that those payments came from frantic loans and shifting funds from one account to another like a desperate shell game. All I had to do was tip the balance. I anonymously leaked documents, courtesy of Marcus's digging, that showed discrepancies in his accounts. Not enough to prove fraud, but enough to raise suspicion. The effect was immediate. One investor pulled out, then another. And suddenly, my father was left scrambling to plug holes in a ship that was already sinking. The third trap was personal. My mother had always been the silent one, the enabler, the woman who chose peace over principle, who watched me suffer and called it keeping the family together. But Marcus had uncovered her secret too. She had been covering Emily's debts for years, and she had done it by quietly selling off jewelry and heirlooms that didn't belong to her alone. Pieces of my grandmother's estate. Items that should have been divided between us. I sent her a single anonymous envelope. Inside was a photograph of one of those pieces, a necklace, with the pawnshop receipt attached. No words. Just evidence. I wanted her to know someone was watching. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness she had once let me drown in. The results came faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Emily was dodging loan sharks. My father was facing lawsuits from former partners. And my mother, well, she had begun calling my phone late at night, her voice trembling as she left messages. "Evelyn, please, if this is you, stop. We can fix this. We're still family." I never returned the calls. Because family doesn't abandon you in a hospital bed. Family doesn't try to erase you. And they had made it clear long ago, I wasn't family. But even as I watched them unravel, I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. I didn't just want them to suffer. I wanted them to beg. So I set the final trap of part 2, public exposure. Marcus and I drafted an anonymous dossier, a neat, polished package of every ugly secret we'd uncovered. Debts, fraud, lies, tied together with just enough evidence to make it undeniable. And then we slipped it to the press. Not a big outlet. Not yet. Just a hungry, mid-tier journalist who had been sniffing around for a scandal. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Local businessman under fire for financial irregularities. Prominent socialite linked to high-stakes gambling losses. Names weren't printed, but the descriptions were unmistakable. Anyone in their circle knew exactly who the articles were about. And suddenly, their phones stopped ringing. Their invitations stopped coming. The friends who had once toasted champagne with them now crossed the street to avoid them. I watched it all unfold from my quiet apartment. Alone. Calm. Satisfied. But not finished. Never finished. One night, as I was preparing tea, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A man's voice, rough and low, crackled through the line. You've made powerful enemies, Miss Carter. If you don't stop now, you won't live to enjoy that money. And then the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, the kettle whistling behind me, my hands trembling for the first time since this began. Because this wasn't my family. This was someone else. Someone they owed. And now, thanks to the traps I'd set, their enemies were becoming mine. I didn't flinch when the threats came. I didn't even bother reporting them. Because deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't strangers after me. It was still my family. They were panicking, cornered, thrashing like wild animals. And when animals are cornered, they lash out. But they didn't realize something important. I wasn't trapped with them. They were trapped with me. The cracks in their facade widened by the day. Emily had stopped posting her glossy photos online. The designer clothes, the fancy brunches, the weekend getaways gone. Her friends were whispering, abandoning her, one by one. Marcus delivered a photograph to me one morning. Emily in the back of a taxi, makeup smudged, eyes red from crying, clutching a handbag like it was the last valuable thing she owned. I stared at it for a long time. For years, Emily had made me feel small. Made me feel like I didn't belong in the same room as her. But now? She looked like the ghost of her former self. And I wasn't finished with her yet. My father was unraveling faster than I expected. The lawsuits had begun. Former business partners were circling like vultures. His calls to investors went unanswered, his once impeccable reputation in tatters. He even tried to contact me. Left a voicemail. Evelyn, he said, his voice hoarse. We need to talk. We can fix this together. You don't understand what's happening here. But I did understand. He wasn't calling as a father. He was calling as a drowning man reaching for the only raft still afloat. And I wasn't about to throw him a lifeline. My mother, she was the most complicated of them all. For weeks, she had remained silent. But now the silence cracked. Letters began arriving at my apartment. Handwritten, carefully folded. Each one began the same. My dearest Evelyn, and each one was filled with apologies. Excuses. Pleas for forgiveness. I didn't know what Emily was doing. I was only trying to keep the peace. I thought I was protecting you. Lies. All of them. I burned the letters without reading them fully. Because there was no apology strong enough to erase the image of me lying in that hospital bed, waiting for a family that never came. But I wasn't content with watching them fall apart quietly. No, I wanted them to feel it. So, I set the next trap. Emily's weakness was greed. My father's was pride. And my mother's? Her weakness was loyalty. Not to me, of course. She had never chosen me. Her loyalty was to Emily. She would protect my sister at any cost. And I was about to use that against them both. With Marcus's help, I arranged for a fake investor to approach Emily. Someone offering her a way out. Quick cash in exchange for a small favor. It was, of course, a trap. A deal too good to be true. Emily bit immediately. She always had a nose for shortcuts, a hunger for easy money. But when she showed the offer to my mother, begging for advice, my mother did what she always did. She tried to save her. She encouraged Emily to take it. She even offered to front her part of the buy-in. Exactly as I knew she would. Within days, both of them were knee-deep in a fabricated scheme. And when the bottom fell out, when the money disappeared, the investor gone, they had no one to blame but themselves. I sat in my apartment, sipping tea, listening to the recording Marcus had secured of their frantic phone call. Emily sobbing, my mother whispering, "It'll be all right. We'll figure this out." And then Emily's voice breaking through, sharp and venomous. "This is your fault. You told me to do it." I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me like music. For the first time, they weren't united against me. For the first time, they were tearing each other apart. But the masterpiece was still to come. Because what my family didn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that I had one final card left to play. Something bigger than debts. Bigger than fraud. A truth they had buried years ago. A truth I had just uncovered. Marcus had found the birth records. And with them, a secret that would shatter everything. The folder sat on my table like a loaded gun. Thin. Unassuming. But inside was the kind of truth that could obliterate lives. I hesitated before opening it again. Not because I doubted what Marcus had found, but because part of me already knew. I had always felt it, deep down. That hollow, gnawing sense that something about my family had never fit quite right. And now I had the proof. The inheritance wasn't mine by accident. It wasn't generosity from a distant uncle. It was payment. Blood money. Marcus's research laid it out in excruciating detail. My uncle, the man who left me $11 million, had once been business partners with my father. Together, they built their first company. Together, they shared every risk, every profit. Until one day, my father betrayed him, stole from him, ruined him, left him bankrupt and disgraced. And while my uncle spent years clawing his way back to stability, my father thrived on the very foundation he had stolen. The only reason my family had ever known wealth was because it wasn't theirs to begin with. The sinister part was this. My uncle hadn't just written me into his will out of kindness. He had done it to make a point. Because he knew my father would see it as the ultimate betrayal. His fortune, stolen once by my father, now returned to the daughter my father had despised the most. The daughter they had abandoned. Me. When I finished reading, my hands were trembling. But it wasn't fear. It was rage. Because suddenly everything made sense. Why my father had treated me like a mistake. Why Emily had always been elevated, protected, adored. Why my mother had chosen silence over justice. They had built their entire lives on theft. On betrayal. And now, their sins were coming home to roost. Through me. I closed the folder and whispered into the empty room. They're going to choke on this. The next day, I set the stage. Marcus helped me draft anonymous letters, each one containing just enough detail from the file to make it undeniable. We mailed copies to my father's remaining business partners, to Emily's dwindling circle of friends, to the very social clubs that had once worshipped my mother's carefully polished image. And then, the final blow, I delivered one copy straight to my father's office. Hand-delivered. I wanted him to know. I wanted him to feel the weight of betrayal the same way I had felt it all my life. The fallout was immediate. By the end of the week, whispers spread like wildfire. He stole his fortune from his own brother. The whole family knew. That money isn't theirs, it never was. And suddenly, the Carters weren't just drowning in debt and scandal. They were branded as thieves. Parasites. A dynasty built on lies. I watched it all unfold from the safety of my apartment, the city glowing outside my window. And I thought of my uncle, a man who had died carrying the weight of betrayal on his shoulders. I wondered if he was watching now. If he was smiling, knowing his revenge had finally been delivered. Through me. But even as satisfaction coursed through me, I knew my work wasn't done. Because my family still hadn't broken. Not completely. They were still clinging to each other, whispering in dark corners, plotting ways to survive. And survival wasn't enough. I wanted them ruined. Utterly. Irrevocably. So, I began planning the final act. A stage where all their sins would be laid bare. Public. Brutal. Inescapable. And I would be the one pulling the strings. The Carters were collapsing, but not fast enough.
Not for me.
Yes, their reputations were shredded. Yes, their debts were mounting. Yes, their lies were out in the open. But they were still clinging to each other like rats on a sinking ship. And I wasn't satisfied with rats merely drowning. I wanted them to devour each other first. It started with a phone call. I used a voice modifier, keeping my words sharp and anonymous. "Emily," I whispered into the receiver, "your father is preparing to blame you for everything. He's already speaking to lawyers. He says the inheritance should have gone to him, but you ruined his chances. He's cutting you off." She gasped, breath hitching. "What?" No, he wouldn't. But I knew the seed had been planted. Emily's paranoia would do the rest. Next, I called my father. "Your wife has been covering for Emily for years," I said flatly. "She sold family heirlooms. She knew about the gambling. She even helped her with the last scheme. Ask her yourself, she won't deny it." He tried to interrupt, but I hung up before he could. And just like that, the second seed was planted. Within days, Marcus confirmed what I already expected. Shouting matches had begun in their house. Emily accusing my father of betrayal. My father lashing out at my mother. My mother screaming through tears that she had no choice. The unity that had once been weaponized against me was splintering. And I was the one holding the hammer. But manipulation in the shadows wasn't enough. Not for the finale. The final act had to be public. Unforgettable. A stage so bright they couldn't possibly hide in the shadows anymore. So I arranged it. A charity gala. The Carters had always prided themselves on their philanthropy, hosting grand events where they pretended generosity while flaunting wealth. But this time, the event wouldn't be theirs. It would be mine. Funded by the inheritance they tried to steal. Organized under my name. And every powerful person in the city would be invited, including them. When the invitations went out, my lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn? It's bold. Risky." I smiled coldly. "It's necessary. They need to be humiliated where it hurts most, in front of the people whose opinions they crave." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure everything is prepared." The night of the gala arrived. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a simple black dress. Not flashy. Not extravagant. I didn't need sparkle or jewels. I had truth. And truth would be my crown. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and whispered curiosity. Everywhere I turned, I saw faces from my past, people who had once ignored me, dismissed me, whispered about me. But tonight, their eyes were on me with something new. Respect. Curiosity. Fear. And then they arrived. My family. Late, of course. Desperate to make an entrance. Emily in a red dress that didn't quite fit, her makeup heavy enough to hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. My father, stiff, his suit slightly wrinkled, jaw clenched like stone. My mother, pale, lips trembling even as she forced a smile. They looked like ghosts, and they were about to be buried. I let the evening unfold, the chatter and music masking the tension. And then, when the moment was right, I stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady. "Thank you for joining me tonight. This event is not just about charity. It's about truth." The crowd murmured, curious. My family stiffened in their seats. And then, with the calm precision of a surgeon, I began to cut. I laid out the story, the betrayal of my uncle, the stolen fortune, the lies, the debts, the schemes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I simply told the truth. And as I spoke, I watched the color drain from my family's faces. Emily shifting uncomfortably. My father gripping the armrest until his knuckles turned white. My mother silently crying, her tears smudging her carefully applied makeup. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Dead silent. And then the whispers began. Sharp. Ruthless. Unforgiving. The Carters weren't just finished. They were disgraced. Publicly. Irrevocably. And I stood there, watching, as the people who had once treated me like a burden now looked at me like I was something else entirely. Not a victim, not a loser, but a reckoning. The applause didn't come. When I finished speaking, there was only silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then the whispers swelled. Thieves. How could they? All this time, lies. Eyes turned like knives toward my family's table. Emily shifted, her face crimson, her hand clutching her wine glass, so tightly it cracked. My father sat stiff, trying to hold onto his dignity like a man clinging to driftwood. My mother bowed her head, tears staining her silk dress. For the first time in my life, they weren't the Carters, the untouchable dynasty. They were just people, exposed, small, and I was the one who had done it. As the crowd murmured, I stepped down from the stage, my heels clicking like a gavel striking judgment. I didn't rush. I wanted them to feel every second of my approach. When I reached their table, I leaned down, just enough for only them to hear. Stand up. They didn't move. So I said it again, louder. Stand up. The room went quiet again, watching. Slowly, stiffly, my father pushed back his chair. My mother followed, trembling. Emily hesitated, but eventually rose too, her eyes darting to the watching crowd. I gestured to the empty floor at the center of the ballroom. Go there. They obeyed. It was almost surreal, the family who had once ordered me around now moving at my command. The crowd parted as they walked, whispers rising like smoke. By the time they reached the center, all eyes were locked on them. I stepped forward, my voice cold and cutting. For years, this family treated me like I was nothing. They called me weak, a loser, a burden. But tonight, the truth is clear. I looked at them one by one. You are the burden. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily shook her head, her lips trembling. Evelyn, please stop. We can fix this. We can explain. On your knees. The words cut like glass. Emily froze. My father's face twisted with rage. You dare. I turned sharply to him. I said, kneel. The silence that followed was suffocating. The crowd held its breath. And then, to my astonishment, it was my mother who moved first. She lowered herself, knees hitting the polished floor with a dull thud. Her mascara-streaked face lifted toward me, pleading. Please, Evelyn, don't do this. The sight shattered something in Emily. Mother, she choked, but when she saw the eyes of the crowd burning into her, she collapsed too, sobbing. That left only my father, the proud, arrogant man who had looked at me my entire life as if I were less than human. He stood rigid, jaw clenched, sweat beading at his temples. Do it, I whispered. The silence dragged. Every second felt like a lifetime. And then, slowly, painfully, he lowered himself. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some disgusted, some fascinated. And there they were, the mighty Carters, on their knees, before me. For a long moment I just looked at them. So small, so pathetic. Then I leaned in close, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through their bones. You abandoned me, mocked me, called me worthless. But tonight, the whole world sees the truth. You were nothing without lies. And now, you're nothing at all. Emily sobbed harder. My mother clutched at my dress, whispering apologies I didn't care to hear. My father stared at the floor, hollow, broken. I stepped back, straightened, looked out at the sea of faces watching. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels echoed against the marble floor, louder than the whispers, louder than the music that tried and failed to restart. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. They were finished. As I reached the exit, Marcus was waiting, his face unreadable. Well, he asked quietly. I exhaled, a slow, steady breath. They'll never recover, I said. And I'll never be forgotten. When I stepped into the cool night air, the city lights stretched out before me, endless and alive. For the first time, I wasn't Evelyn the burden. I wasn't Evelyn the loser. I was Evelyn Carter. The reckoning. If you've been with me through this story, tell me, would you have gone as far as I did? Or further? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because trust me, there are more stories like this, and you won't want to miss them.